All right. Hello and welcome back to the 101 Fantasy Football Show on YouTube. My name is Sawyer and I am your host, and I'm excited to do another episode today. We're going to be doing another divisional breakdown episode. So if you are new to the channel, basically, I've started out the entire NFL and we're going division by division, looking at 4 teams at a time. And we're going to look at kind of what the projections I have for the offense are for 2020, as well as I've got the contract situations shown in a way that's kind of easy to understand and easy to see. Just visualize in a way that we can kind of break down some dynasty outlooks as well as we go through the teams. So today we got the AFC West on deck, a fun division to talk about, one that I think is only going to get more and more exciting as the years go on. Kansas City going to keep pushing the other teams to keep pace. And so a division I'm really excited to talk about. If you're interested to hear about what I have to say about the AFC East, the AFC North, or the AFC South, you can check out the channel. Those videos have already been posted, and the NFC we'll get into next week. If you like any of the stuff that I'm saying, or you're interested in my content, you can follow me on Twitter at Sawyer_FF. I post a lot of my research on there. I find a bunch of, I post my tidbits I find, as well as all the projections, summaries I make. Generally, I throw those all up on Twitter. So if you don't have time maybe to check out all the videos, but you just want to see the information I'm putting out there, you can go follow me there on Twitter. That's at Sawyer_FF. And you can see all the stuff that I'm putting out and things I'm finding. Without further ado, I want to jump into this episode, jump into the teams because we got a lot to talk about. And so we are going to go, this is just my overall rankings screen, but we're going to go over to the Denver Broncos. They're going to be the first team that we talk about today. So again, if you're new to the channel, this is kind of what a projections page looks like for me. I've got kind of what I see the team looking like, and then as well, I've got what all the players are statted out for, and you'll see in the kind of mid to right hand side here what those actually turn into in terms of fantasy projections for the upcoming season and fantasy points in different scoring formats. So yeah, without further ado, Denver Broncos, what do I expect from them this season? Well, they change up their coaching staff a bit. They bring in Pat Shurmur as their offensive coordinator, a guy who we've previously seen with the New York Giants these last few years. And they've talked a lot in this offseason specifically about, the Kansas City Chiefs are a very high-scoring offense, and they are kind of leading the charge in the AFC West right now. And kind of other teams are going to have to adjust to try to keep pace. And so Denver was saying that they want to score more. They're going to have to go a faster pace. And so one of the things that we get from that is that I've got their attempts going way up this year. 995 isn't like the highest in the league by any means, but it's a much higher pace of an offense. A team that's going to be trying to score more for sure. That's also shown in the amount of touchdowns I have, both rushing and passing touchdowns. So on offense, I'm pretty excited about for 2020 overall. When we look at the quarterback, unfortunately, that it doesn't really reflect on the quarterback in the sense that I don't expect a huge season from Drew Lock. I think he's a solid fantasy quarterback for the year. He's a bit risky, so he's not a guy that I'm going to be overly confident in drafting. I think in redraft leagues, as long as it's not a super flex league, you're going to be able to get better guys. Leave Lock on the wire, a guy who you can pick up to be a fantasy streamer. However, he might have some value in super flex if you want to take a shot on a quarterback who I think will be in a pretty solid offense. I think Drew Lock, I believe in the player. I think he will develop into a solid quarterback, and I think he will be the quarterback of the future for the Broncos. The question is just what can he get done for this season? And you'll see what I have started out here. It's a fairly average season for a fantasy quarterback. Now let's jump into the running backs because they're a bit more exciting. I have a lot of things I want to talk about here because they bring in Melvin Gordon. He's the big signing. He's been a great fantasy football running back for years. I know I've heard the screams. He's not actually an efficient back. People on Twitter, people in the fantasy community don't really love Melvin Gordon as a player. However, you can't argue with the fact that he's been a great fantasy football running back, multiple top 10 running back finishes for fantasy football. And the problem is he's coming into an offense that already had Phillip Lindsay, a guy who in his first 2 seasons has been top 20 running back as well. He's had multiple 1,000-yard rushing seasons. He's been a Pro Bowler. He's just a fan favorite, great story, really hardworking player, a guy you want to cheer for. And so the first thing I want to say about the Gordon signing, Royce Freeman's pretty much irrelevant. Last year he had 132 carries, 50 receptions, or not receptions, but targets. That role is pretty much going to be diminished to almost nothing. I think there's even been reports he might get cut. So for now, if you have Royce Freeman, He's totally off the radar for redraft unless there were to be injuries, or if he gets cut. And in Dynasty, if you're holding on to him, you're hoping he probably gets cut or traded and gets onto another team where he maybe has a situation, because I think he's got some decent talent. But still, you're not going to be holding on to Royce because you're not expecting him to become a starter on any team. There's just more talented backs in the NFL. But let's look at the breakdown for this season. I do want to get into this because there's some interesting stats I've pulled up for this. With Gordon and Lindsey, something that's super important when we're trying to figure these guys out is it sounds like they're both going to have significant roles. But what are those roles going to be? Because there are touches that are more valuable in fantasy football than others. And those are touchdowns. We want guys who are going to get the red zone touches, going to get the chance to score those 6 points for us week in, week out. And receptions. A single reception in fantasy football in half PPR leagues is roughly worth 3 total carries. And in full PPR, it's a little bit more. In standard, it's a little bit less. But because you're getting the points for those receptions, they're very, very important to have. And so having the guy in the backfield who's going to get more of those targets, more receptions, as well as the guy getting more touchdowns, that's important. And so when you look at, first off, we'll look at the kind of receiving numbers. Effective yards is a good stat by Football Outsiders that kind of just gives us an idea of not just what they actually got on the field, but how good they actually were in the receiving game. And so out of Philip Lindsay's 196 receiving yards last year, his effective yards were actually only 48 receiving yards, which is like bottom 5 in the NFL. Really not a great receiver, according to a lot of analytics, actually. Yet Melvin Gordon, who had 296 receiving yards, he had a 246 effective yards. So much more, much better percentage. Not saying he's a elite pass catching running back, but a better pass catching running back than Philip Lindsay. And that shows up in a lot of metrics. And so I think, although it may profile differently, we see Lindsay, he's the smaller guy. People kind of see him as a scat back because he's got a lot of speed and you want to get him in open space. Melvin Gordon is the better receiver in this backfield, and I expect the team knows that, and they're going to be getting Gordon. He's going to get the ball in the receiving game a little bit more than Philip Lindsay. So you'll see that stat out here. I've got 54-39. I'm pretty confident in saying Gordon will get more targets. The question will be kind of how that split is, but that's how I see it for the upcoming season. And then the other thing is touchdowns. So looking at their red zone, this is actually something I think is interesting because I think Philip Lindsay is a little bit underrated when it comes here, and I think Melvin Gordon's a little overrated. So I know when they signed Gordon, they said, we love him because he scores touchdowns. He has a knack for finding the end zone. But you look at last season, so 10 zone touches. Melvin Gordon was 7 for 20. Basically, he had 20 carries inside the 10-yard line. He scored 7 touchdowns on those carries, giving him a 35% touchdown percentage, I guess, in the 10 zone. He was 7 for 20. Whereas Philip Lindsay, he had 11 attempts, so less attempts. He scored 5 touchdowns in the 10 within 10 yards. So that's a 45%. So he does better there. Then you look at the 5 yards, the 5 zone, if you want to call it that. Philip Lindsay, he scored 5 touchdowns on 8 attempts within the 5-yard line. So the same 5 touchdowns, but 5 for 8 is a 63% rate in that area of the field, whereas Melvin Gordon was 7 for 15, which is below 50%. It's 47. So Lindsay actually did better, and you can contribute some of that to their offensive line play. However, I think these guys are much closer in terms of their efficiency in the red zone than people may think, just because Melvin Gordon's the bigger back, Lindsay's a smaller guy. So I would love to see Philip Lindsay get a decent amount of chances there. However, from the sounds of it, I think Melvin Gordon, we have to expect they brought him in for this idea. He's probably going to get more of those 10-zone carries. And so that's where the breakdown comes in. And so with Melvin Gordon getting the receiving work, getting more touchdowns, getting those important touches, I think he's actually going to be a very valuable back in fantasy in 2020, with Philip Lindsay being an amazing handcuff who might have some standalone value depending on how the roles shake out. At the wide receiver position, there's not a ton to talk about here because, well, Courtland Sutton is the guy, and Jerry Jeudy is an elite prospect. He's one of the greatest route running prospects to come out in the last few years. I think he's a spectacular talent. I'm super high on him. If you've watched my rookie videos, you know that, and you can go see me talk in depth about Jeudy and briefly about Hamler as well behind Sutton, what I think of those guys. And I'll spoil it here. I love Jeudy, and he's my number 1 rookie wide receiver for this class for Dynasty, and a guy I'm a big fan of. However, for this year, it's going to be Courtland Sutton leading the way. Last year, Courtland Sutton was a top 20 receiver in every single category, and he's being drafted outside of the top 20 this year. I don't know. I don't really think that's smart of us. He's proven it as a second-year receiver. Now he enters his third year. It's the magical third-year breakout for receivers. We talk about it all the time. You want receivers going into their third year. This is when they tend to really break out and become stars. And he was talented last year. They're going to pass the ball more this year than they did last year. I think maybe not in terms of percentage, but because I think they're going to have a lot more plays overall, there's just going to be more targets total to go around. And he's going to have a large chunk of that target share. So I'm a fan of Sutton. And I think Jeudy can have a decent role for redraft in 2020. And then the tight end position, Noah Fant, he continues to develop. He's going to be a second-year tight end. Not a guy I'm like super, super high on. And I think in this range, there's a lot of different guys you can take shots on. He has upside, but there's a lot of risk here. And I think there might be some better targets that I'll talk about or maybe have talked about at other points, like Chris Herndon, for example. I think roughly I have them set it out for the same number, but I think I'd rather take the chance on Herndon than Fant. But I think he's got a decent fantasy season upcoming, and he's a good prospect. So I'm not against drafting him at his position and taking the shot on Noah Fant. In terms of how this shakes out, so now you can see here, I've got this table to show my rankings compared to the expert consensus rankings, and I've got it color-coded. So for the most part, not a ton that I'm different on in terms of value. I'm slightly higher on Melvin Gordon, which I think I've explained already to you guys with just the receiving work and the touchdowns. Bat those home because those are the two most important things that you want your running backs to be getting in fantasy football. But I still think Lindsey's role will have him fairly priced. Locke, he's okay. As I said before, Sutton, I'm higher than consensus on him, which I think that came through with what I was saying. Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. Unfortunately for now, something to note, KJ Hamler is dealing with an injury that has him out for a couple weeks. He looked really good. There was actually some videos popping up of him in camp, looking really good in terms of his route running. He's an explosive, small-ish, but an explosive receiver. Actually very small, not small-ish. However, he could be creative, and if he gets in the field, they might find ways to use him out of the slot that he could be very effective. And then Fant, I'm a little bit lower than consensus on him, and I've explained that there's just guys I'd rather take in that range that I'm taking my shots on. In terms of the dynasty outlook, not a ton to say that we really haven't. Jeudy, I'm a huge fan of in the long term. Like I said, he's my number one dynasty wide receiver for this year. KJ Hamler, he's a decent prospect for sure. And I think with Patrick and Deshaun Hamilton being the guys behind him, I think he can easily clear that out and become the 3 in this offense. The question will be how good this offense gets. However, I am a fan of this whole division having to keep pace with the Chiefs. So I'd be willing to take a chance on Hamler, especially if you can get him in the 3rd round of your rookie drafts. That's a great value. Late 2nd is probably the highest I'd go on him, though. And then tight ends, one thing I do want to mention is Albert Okwuegbunam. I believe that's the pronunciation. I'm sorry if I butchered that. But Albert O, he was a highly touted tight end prospect, or at least an exciting tight end prospect going into his final year before he was going to go into the draft. And then this past year, he was kind of weak, and so he's kind of fallen off the board. However, those years before, he was at Missouri. He was playing with Drew Lock when he was getting more touchdowns, getting more looks, and people were really excited about him. So now he's paired up with Drew Lock again. I don't expect much for him this season. However, something to keep in mind as some teams continue to move towards these 2 tight end sets, he's a potential guy you could stash. And maybe this team ends up going with 2 tight end sets with Fant and Albert O at some point in the future. So maybe like a dynasty stash for now that you will keep an eye on. Now the Kansas City Chiefs. Sorry, I had a lot to say about Denver. There's a little bit less to say about the Chiefs, which is funny because you want a lot of pieces in the Chiefs offense. However, that's really all you need to know about the Chiefs offense. You want the Chiefs on your team, and it's pretty obvious to me that there's a lot of guys you're going to know and you're already going to like. So Patrick Mahomes, he's a top 2 fantasy quarterback this year. I think it's him or Lamar Jackson. That's really the debate. I'm expecting another great season from Mahomes. I have no reason to believe otherwise. Running back position. Now, I guess, there could be a lot of debate around Clyde Edwards-Helaire. However, if you follow my channel, you know, or you follow me on Twitter, I am a huge Clyde Edwards-Helaire fan. He was my number one rookie running back going into the NFL draft for fantasy football. Not necessarily saying he was the most talented back, but for fantasy, his skill set to me looked like the one that was going to be the best for producing fantasy points. And then he gets drafted in the first round by the Kansas City Chiefs. He was the guy they wanted. Their GM, their coach, so that's Westbrook or not Westbrook, that's Veach and Andy Reid, were saying that they remind him of Westbrook, a player that Andy Reid has already coached in the past and was an awesome fantasy player when he was a running back for Andy Reid. Andy Reid, I mean, I'm not going to get into the numbers because, as I said, I've explained these before on other videos. So if you want to go hear me break down Clyde Edwards-Helaire and why I love him, you can check out my rookie rankings videos. But it's just fantasy gold when you pair a good running back, a talented number one running back with Andy Reid's system. Damian Williams is now out. There's like Darrell Williams, DeAndre Washington, these guys fighting for touches behind him. But this is going to be Clyde's backfield from day one. And he's going to be a stellar running back. I think I have him statted, like, we'll get into it, but I'm pretty much saying, barring health, he's a lock for top 10, chance to be top 5, and an amazing asset to have for 2020. In the receivers, Tyreek Hill. I mean, you know the name because he's become a staple at the top end of wide receiver drafts or rankings in your drafts over these last few years. And I mean, I'm expecting nothing but the same. Like, yes, he is a bit boom bust. He has those weeks where he's really, really on and the weeks where he's just not producing for you. And so that's a bit of a risk to take at the top end of your drafts. And there are other guys at the top end that are a bit more safe. However, he's a great player to have on your team. He's tied to Patrick Mahomes. For redraft, he's going to produce good numbers for the season. And so I'm in on Tyreek Hill for the year. A guy that I think will give you good numbers for 2020. Here's the one place that I guess I'm off of that other people seem to be on is the other receivers in Kansas City. I just think that the way this team operates, they take shots downfield. You're going to get guys getting touchdowns, but there's just not a ton of targets beyond what I think is going to be really Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce soaking up huge volumes. And then also Clyde Edwards-Helaire getting some work. I mean, Sammy Watkins, he got targets last year. Mecole Hardman, this is the one that I want to talk about the most because Mecole Hardman, he seems to be getting a lot of love on fantasy Twitter and in drafts right now. But let me just point this stat out for you. So last season, Mecole Hardman, yes, he was a rookie. And so I will give him the fact that now he's developing as a second-year receiver. And maybe I've even started him for more targets than I think will happen. But like this 54 target projection still feels a bit generous when knowing these stats. But last year, without Tyreek Hill on the field, Mecole Hardman averaged 5.5 fantasy points per game. That was across 4 games. He was averaging 5.5 targets. Then without Watkins on the field, so Hill on the field, but no Sammy Watkins, there were 2 games where this was the case. He averaged 3.5 targets per game. And then there were 10 games the rest of the season where Sammy Watkins and Tyreek Hill were both active. In those 10 games, Mecole Hardman had 12 targets. 1.2 targets per game. You cannot play a fantasy player in your lineup who's getting 1 or 2 targets a week. That's just, you can't rely on that. And even like, yes, some of those targets he would still, like, he's Mecole Hardman. He's super fast. He's the Kansas City offense. Maybe that one target becomes a 58-yard touchdown reception, but 1 target a game, you just cannot rely on that for fantasy football. And so, yes, it will go up. He's a second-year receiver this year. I think he will start to kind of pass Demarcus Robinson, who actually had 55 targets. So we'll see some of that target share shift towards Hardman. It just seems like the Mecole Hardman hype is like he's going to have an explosion year. And I just think after looking at the usage last year, there's no indication that they were using him more as the season went on. And so I don't think there's anything to say here. For sure, he's a slam dunk pick. So I would be avoiding him at his price. He's the one guy that I'm pretty off of in this offense, as well as just kind of in general in Dynasty and everything. I know I'm much lower on Hardman than I am on a lot of other people are. At the tight end position, Travis Kelce, he's my number 1 tight end this year. Spoiler alert. But the past 4 seasons, he's been the tight end 1 in PPR. 4 straight years. Injury or not, he is still the number 1 guy for 4 straight seasons in PPR. 3 out of 4 in standard leagues. He's an absolute beast. Um, he's going to give you top 2 numbers. Yes, potentially Kittle beats him, but for now, I'm still riding on the Travis Kelce train. He's tied to Mahomes, tied to the best offense in football. I'm all in on Travis Kelce. When it comes to how I rank, I highlighted Mahomes in orange or red, I guess, because I have him second and other people have him first. I would take Lamar Jackson over Patrick Mahomes, which I think is significant to note if you're in that position and you're looking at taking a quarterback high. However, I mean, altogether, I would recommend just not drafting a quarterback high. It's really hard for them to return the value that you're paying for them. So I would wait and hold out. But just as of a note, I do have Lamar Jackson ahead of Mahomes. For Clyde, I'm pretty much right on status quo for expert consensus rankings right now. So that's roughly where I'm going to take him. There are guys I like more than him for this year. However, there's not many. And so I'm a big fan. I also think there's less risk than some people think with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think he's a slam dunk pick for the year. Tyreek Hill, pretty fine with consensus. Same with Kelce. And I've explained why I'm much lower on Mecole Hardman. Sammy Watkins as well, I'm slightly lower on. I know I didn't talk about him much, but it's just the same idea of there's not a lot of targets behind those top-end guys in this offense. What they look like for the long term, Patrick Mahomes just got signed to 1 million years playing football in Kansas City. So for now in Dynasty, if you own Mahomes, you're sitting pretty, looking great. You could consider trading him. It's not the time to buy him, but you could consider trading him. His value is going to be immense right now. But I would just say it's probably best to just hold. You have a great piece. And you can plug him in every single week for the next 5-10 years, barring health. So he's a beast. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I love him for fantasy, and especially Dynasty. I think he's now up to my number 4 Dynasty running back. And the reason is talent is super important, production is super important, but also term is very important. And with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, him being a first-round pick, you get that 5th-year option. It's very highly likely that he gets 5 years in this offense with Andy Reid, with Patrick Mahomes. It's a great situation for a guy who has a great fantasy skill set. So as long as he stays healthy, I think he'll return the value of a top 5 running back, maybe not this season, but the next 4 seasons after that. And so you can draft that and you can lock up the term. To me, that's just so valuable versus all these guys who are kind of like, we're unsure. Dalvin Cook, he's in the last year. Maybe he gets the franchise tag next year. Maybe he doesn't. We don't know. And then after that, we don't know where he's going to sign. It's just you love the certainty of Mahomes, Andy Reid, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That's his situation for 4 or 5 years. And I'm still a fan of Travis Kelce. He just got the extension. So I've estimated these numbers out based on the reports. He's going to be around for a while. I'm fine with owning him. Tyreek Hill, I think maybe after 3 seasons there'll be question marks how much money they'll have to pay him. But for the next few seasons, and I'd be still all in on Tyreek and think he's a good talent right now. He is one guy who I would keep in mind that I don't know if other teams would be able to use him as well. So keep that note. If he ends up ever, it sounds like, okay, they may not re-sign him. Maybe then is the time to get out. But for now, all in on Hill. And I'm kind of off the rest of the team, though, for Dynasty. All right, LA Chargers. Oh, man, this is a team that I tend to be just a lower on in general on the year. It sounds like Tyrod Taylor will be the starter. I have kind of believed that will be the case ever since they drafted Herbert. I thought maybe if it was Tagovailoa, if there was a chance that it wouldn't be Tyrod. But with Herbert, he's a bit more raw. I expect it to be Taylor for at least a good portion of the season. And as a result, I just think this is going to be a slow-paced offense. They're the one team in this division I think is going to try to slow the game down a bit. They're not going to be able to stay on the field a ton because I don't think they're going to be able to move this offense a ton. And as a result, I'm just a little bit off of them altogether. Tyrod Taylor, like I said, not a huge fan. You never really want those quarterbacks that are going to be splitting time anyway. So neither of these guys are important to have other than, Dynasty. Herbert's a good ad. And these guys could be, I guess, weekly waiver wire flyers, but that's about it. At the running back position, Austin Eckler. I like Eckler a lot. I do. However, just keep in mind, like when it's very unlikely or very uncommon that running backs who receive over 100 targets in a year then repeat that number. I forget the exact stat. I wish I had the stat up right now to talk to you about. But essentially, they do lose a good amount. There's a regression to the mean. And so I do have his targets coming down because it's not only that working against him, because yes, he is a very, very good pass catcher, but it's also that Tyrod Taylor isn't Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers has no mobility in the pocket, and so his way of escaping the pocket is dumping it off. Whereas a guy like Tyrod, his way of escaping the pocket is tucking it and running. And so I think we're going to see a decrease in targets. That will suck because, Eckler's volume, I think, will go up. His rushing attempts are going to go up. This guy's actually a beast. So I think people have this idea that he's kind of just a scat back. No, he's a built dude. He's smaller in terms of height and stature in that sense, but he's a built dude. He can run the ball. So it sucks because if he had those targets, he'd be potentially a top 5 back. But I think he's kind of that borderline RB1 too. I haven't giving you what would be considered RB1 numbers at 218 in most years for half PPR. But he's kind of in that range with a few other guys who you're probably paying roughly the same for each guy, and there's a few other guys I like more. Behind him, Justin Jackson, I think, is the handcuff to own. Just something to note. If anything were to happen to Eckler, I think Jackson would have the biggest role. Kelly will have a role too, though. Neither one's just going to step in and become the alpha dog if Eckler goes down. At the wide receiver position, it pains me to say it because I'm the type who likes a craftsman receiver. I like a guy who can run routes. Keenan Allen is a craftsman receiver. This guy, he works at his craft of running routes, and he is very, very, very special at running routes. However, even with an immense target share, I've got him up at 26.4% target share. That would be up from what he had last season. I just don't think there's going to be enough targets overall in terms of volume in this offense to go around to give him the numbers that you've seen from him in these past couple seasons. And so I think there are just better players to own in fantasy in 2020. Not saying that Keenan Allen isn't an amazing talent, but yeah, 138 targets. I don't think he gets to 100 receptions again. I think his touchdowns won't be super high because I just don't think Tyrod's going to be throwing a lot of touchdowns. I don't think this offense will be scoring a lot. And just a guy that I'm just not all in on. Mike Williams, another great talent, kind of a hidden talent. I feel like not a lot of people talk about Mike Williams being a very good talent. But he it feels like people think he's a bust. Yes, he was a first-round pick. Maybe that was a bit high, but he's still a good player. However, until Herbert takes over, Herbert is a good downfield passer, and I'm really excited about the prospects of the Herbert-Mike Williams connection. But until that happens, probably not a guy who you're going to need to target because he just, again, not a ton of targets already. He's not a volume type of receiver, and there won't be a high volume in this offense overall this season. Behind them, I think Andre Patton may have gotten cut already from camp. Whatever it's going to be, it's going to be KJ Hill and Joe Reed that are going to be fighting for that third role. It sounds like they bring two different skill sets, but realistically, neither one's a guy you need to look at for redraft, and we'll talk a little bit more on the dynasty side of it. And then Hunter Henry, a tight end that I think is being overpriced. I think he's a big name because he's very talented. Again, another talented tight end. Just without the volume in this offense, I think there are guys who are going to give you similar fantasy numbers that just won't cost as much because they're not as big names. Like Jonnu Smith, for example. I would take Jonnu Smith. I think I have Jonnu Smith statted for 6 more fantasy points. And so, yes, that's just a swing of a touchdown. However, I would draft these guys right around each other, and you can get Jonnu Smith at a cheaper price than you're paying for Hunter Henry. So just something to keep in mind. So how this looks when it talks value, obviously a lot of red, a lot of gray, no green here because there's just no one that I think is going to outproduce what the consensus ranking is or what you're paying for them right now. And generally an offense that I'm off of. Explained the case for Keenan, explained the case for Hunter Henry. So yeah, just a team that I think sadly, it's going to be kind of one of these teams that's really good defensively, so that's going to keep them in games, but their offense just isn't going to be awesome, and there's just not going to be a ton of value to find there. In terms of dynasty, at least the dynasty prospects look a bit better because Tyrod, he will be replaced by Herbert. I like Herbert. He reminds me of Josh Allen. When Josh Allen came out, he was super raw, not a great passer, and so he does have a lot of development to do, but he has some of the essentials. He's got the arm power, arm talent. He's got the athletic abilities to run the ball as well. So he's got the ability to become a good fantasy quarterback. We'll just see if he can really excel in this offense and develop into that guy that we want him to become. Eckler, term is huge. So in Dynasty, I am a fan of Eckler as much as I don't think he'll be awesome this year. And I don't think he'll ever really get to that that RB, like top 5 RB potential again, unless it's not Herbert at the helm, because I don't think Herbert's going to dump the ball off a lot. He's also a guy who can escape himself, but he's going to be a guy who can be like a back end RB1 for a few years for you, which is really nice to have that term in fantasy football for Dynasty. Jackson and Kelly, guys who I think are just going to be more role players, backups. They'll get like 5 to 10 touches a game, whoever ends up winning the job, and could provide fantasy value in a pinch. But for Dynasty, they're more just kind of a stash to see, I guess, what happens. Maybe one of them earns a bigger role, but we'll see. Wide receivers, Keenan Allen, he's got 1 year left. He's really tough to buy right now. Like, it's just one of those things where it's like, he's a bigger name guy, and it sucks because I like him, but it's the name of the player keeps his price higher than probably what he's worth right now. So I would be trying to sell him on name. At this point, it might be too late to sell him. I think generally the fantasy community is starting to realize as a whole just to avoid this Chargers offense this year. And as a result, in Dynasty, a lot of it is kind of what that first year looks like. So Keenan Allen, yeah, a guy I'm not super in on this year or in Dynasty. Mike Williams, I did say the connection with him and Herbert is interesting. I would be willing to buy Mike Williams. I think his price will be fairly cheap, especially early in the season, because I don't think he'll be producing. And people will say, well, look, he's busted. But I think Mike Williams is a guy who I'd be willing to buy because I think the connection with him and Herbert will be better. And I don't think he has the big name price tag, which is interesting. And then Hunter Henry, he's tough because he's got that big name and he maybe isn't worth the big name. So a guy that I might be selling on the name value right now overall. And then, the one other thing I want to say, Joe Reed and KJ Hill, they bring 2 different skill sets. However, there is a third receiver role in this offense to be earned, and that could be valuable in the future. So KJ Hill, he's a good slot type of guy. He can run routes decently well, but he doesn't have a lot of separation, or not a lot of separation. He doesn't have a lot of speed. He has a nose for the end zone, but he's kind of that type of player. So if that's your flavor, go with him. But Joe Reed, he's the more athletic burner type of player who's going to probably have more boomer bust potential. So that's his style of play. I would just say pick your poison. They drafted them both very late in the draft. They drafted Joe Reed ahead of KJ Hill, if that means anything to you. But I think this is one of those situations where it's just pick your poison, take the guy you want, and hopefully one of them breaks out. All right, last one. The Las Vegas Raiders, a fun team for 2020. Except, well, no. You know what? A fun team for Dynasty, some exciting assets, but they've kind of created this hogwash for 2020 that makes it a bit hard to find players you want to own. So a team that'll be fairly balanced in terms of pace of play, maybe a little bit slower, but I think what you can expect is fairly average, and they're going to be a fairly average split, rushing and passing. Derek Carr, I think he'll be okay, but leave him on the wire, pick him up if you need him in a pinch or need him in a streamable matchup. But that's the type of value you're going to get of Carr. Nothing kind of spectacular or changing from what we've had from Carr in the last 2 years. At the running back position, Josh Jacobs, great player, a talented running back. This season, the question is going to be the receptions and the target share, because part of it is Jay Gruden saying he will give him the ball. They want to get him out used in open space. They didn't use him enough. They want to have him in on third downs, which equals more targets naturally. However, they kind of counteracted that by then getting Lynn Bowden in the draft, a running back receiver type of player, one of those like gadget players. They bring in Devontae Booker, who was more of a pass catching back when he was in Denver. And they have Jalen Richard already, and they gave him another year on contract. So lots of receiving weapons in the backfield. But the one thing I do note that I think is important is that a lot of times running backs, like a rookie running back who receives 1,000 yards rushing, normally they get way more targets than 27. Normally they get about 50 targets or more. However, the 2 in recent memory that did have over 1,000 yards in their rookie season and didn't have over 50 targets are like Todd Gurley, who only had 26 targets in his first season, and Zeke, who had 40 targets in his first season. Both guys got over 1,000 yards rushing. In their second seasons, their targets jumped from, Gurley went from 26 to 58, big target jump. And Zeke went from 40 targets to 61 pace because he only played 10 games that year, but he was on pace for 61. So the targets did go up. And so I think it's fair to assume the targets will go up. They're not going to stay stagnant. It's not just going to be another 25 target season for Jacobs. I don't see him going up to 60, kind of like Gurley and Zeke did, but 49, 50 area, I think that's fair. And as a result, he will be a solid pick at his price. Rashard, Bowden, Booker, all just handcuff pieces. I think Rashard would be the handcuff I'd want to own. And I do own him. I have gone out and done that myself because I do own Josh Jacobs and Jalen Rashard in the league. But Lynn Bowden would be an interesting piece to watch because depending on how he does as a rookie, there's a chance he could become kind of the replacement for Rashard in the future. The wide receiver position, as I was saying, hog wash. We have no idea what this is going to look like. Henry Ruggs, they draft him in the first round. Bryan Edwards, they draft him in the third round. Hunter Renfrow, who was a rookie last year, showed out a lot in the slot. Tyrell Williams, he's the veteran in this offense who was the number one kind of receiver in the room last season. And so you have all four of them there now. It's unclear how they're going to be used at this point in time. We don't know yet. A lot of times when that happens, there's value to be had because if one guy breaks out, you got him at a cheaper value. However, it's really hard for me to pick which one it's going to be. Naturally for me, I want to go to Bryan Edwards because he's been a guy that I've been on since the draft. Go back and check those videos out. I loved Bryan Edwards. He is getting a lot of camp hype right now, which is exciting. It sucks in Dynasty if you don't have him yet. Unfortunately, now with the hype, his price tag will be significantly higher. But I am a big fan of Bryan Edwards. But like I said, it's really hard here to pick which guy it's going to be. So I'd be shooting for the upside. And I think Edwards, Ruggs, and even Tyrell Williams all have upside for the year. I think Renfrow would probably be the avoid pick out of all these guys for 2020, simply because he doesn't have the explosive skill set. He's just kind of a slot dude. And he's not overly athletic at all. And so I would say he's got the most potential to just be like Cole Beasley or Adam Humphries or those guys who just kind of have the decent role for their NFL team, but not much that you want in fantasy. Tight ends, this is where their number one target will be. I believe Darren Waller will lead the team in targets just like he did last season. I have his targets going down slightly this year. And so, yeah, not as many fantasy points as he had last year, but a solid guy that you can get who will give you like tight end 4 to 6 production behind Kittle, Kelsey, Andrews, probably behind Ertz. I think I have him statted behind Ertz, but he could be anywhere in that range. A solid pick in fantasy for 2020. And this is kind of what it looks like. So a lot of colors here, not just a status quo team. I'm higher than community on Derek Carr just because I think he's going to give us what he's given us, and that would be better than what we're paying for. However, none of those areas in the draft, like 24, 28, no matter what it is, you're not going to draft him unless it's super flex. Josh Jacobs, I've got him 9. Community has him 9, 11, 12, 12, 12. So pretty status quo on him. Jalen Rashard, same deal. Lynn Bowden, I'm higher on him because I think he's worth taking a shot on just to see what role he gets. But that's only in a super deep league. I probably would just avoid him and just take a mental note of him and then kind of see what happens, see what role he earns, or keep an eye on him in camp because maybe there's a chance he ends up becoming the handcuff you'd want to own behind Jacobs. Henry Ruggs, I'm lower than consensus on him. I think because he's the flashiest name, he's the one everyone else is trying to buy in on. But like I said, I'd be buying him or Williams or potentially Edwards. Edwards is the by far the cheapest price tag, going at 105, 106, 106. You could get him in with your very last pick. These other guys, maybe you could get Tyrell Williams with your last pick. You probably could. Or maybe not last, but one of your last picks. Henry Ruggs, not sure when you're going to have to pay for him, but like I said, take your shot. It's really, we're unsure what this is going to look like. But I'm buying Bryan Edwards just because you can get him with your last pick, see what you have in him. He's a super talented player. Like I said, if you want to hear my breakdown on him, go check out those rookie videos. Darren Waller, fairly priced, which I've said. And finally, what does the dynasty outlook look like for the Raiders? Derek Carr, he's locked up for 3 years. They have Mariota behind him. I think this is Carr's team. I don't think this is like, people want to be like, oh, look, Mariota, he lost his job to Tannehill. Now he's going to take a job. Don't think so. I think Carr is fine. He's a solid enough quarterback, and he'll keep the job here. Josh Jacobs, something that's valuable about him, like I've said, a lot of term talk this year, and that's important. And so Josh Jacobs, he's got the term, like Clyde Edwards-Helaire does. Like Austin Eckler does. Jacobs has term, which makes him valuable. Richard, he's got 2 years left, so he's potentially the handcuff for 2 years. But in a dynasty league, I'd be much more intrigued by Lynn Bowden and taking the chance on him. Receivers, Henry Ruggs, he was a first-round pick, so you got that fifth-year option. I'm a bit lower on Ruggs than the community, I think, in Dynasty. Not that I don't like him. I just think there's a lot of guys in that tier that you can draft, and I think you can get other guys later. For example, Michael Pittman. I like him and Ruggs. I like Pittman slightly more than Ruggs, but the same tier. And I think you could pay less to get Pittman than you need to pay for Ruggs. Bryan Edwards, as I've already talked about a lot, because I love the guy. I'm kicking myself because I traded him in a dynasty recently, right before the camp hype was coming out. And so I probably won't be able to reacquire him without overpaying. However, he's a guy that I love. If you haven't had your rookie drafts yet, or if you're in dynasty and it's a league where you think the Bryan Edwards owner isn't super on the ball, see if you can get him. Just send an offer, send a feeler, see if you can grab him, because I love him as a guy who could develop into the X receiver in Vegas. And Darren Waller, they got him long-term. He's got 4 years. Tight ends can play into their 30s. He'll be a solid volume player for a while with minimal upside, I think. And that concludes the episode. So we've talked about the AFC. We've talked about all 4 divisions. Next week, we'll get into the NFC. Here, I'm going to scroll through my overall rankings. You can see just kind of all the guys today are highlighted, where they are projected. These are sorted by 6-point passing touchdowns as well as half PPR. But all the other projections are on screen. So if you want to see the numbers, you can pretty much see those there. And that concludes the episode. So thank you for checking in. If you've made it this far, I appreciate it a ton. Leaving a like or comment would be awesome. Go check me out on Twitter at Sawyer_FF, or you can follow the show at the 101 FFS. Reach out to me, contact me with any of your questions. I'd love to communicate with you guys. And again, I appreciate you coming in today and checking out the video. So thank you very much, and take care, guys.